Welcome to Hoedown History, where we explore the history and legends of America's old-time and bluegrass music. So if you're watching this channel, and more specifically this video, most likely you've heard a version of this tune in the film "O Brother, Where Art Thou?" Anyway, if I need to refresh your memory, it's from that scene where the bank robber, George Babyface Nelson, is being marched off by a procession of torch-lit hillbillies to be executed. I think the first time I heard it, I didn't really know what to make of the thing. I mean, it kind of defied all my categories of what I thought a song should be. Was this some kind of Native American medicine man chant, or a traditional old-time fiddle number? Is it a vocal number or an instrumental? And if it's a vocal number, well, what's the lyrics? And maybe the fact that it did defy my categories, well, maybe that's what makes it so cool. It's both driving and haunting, and kind of stands in its own among fiddle tunes. There's nothing else quite like it. Well, here's the thing that few people know. It's that John Hartford, who performs this song for the soundtrack, actually borrowed this tune, which he'd heard from an old recording by an almost forgotten old-time band. And the story of how this original recording of Indian War Whoop was recorded is actually pretty cool. Almost sounds like something out of a Three Stooges skit. So let's dive in. Our story begins with this man, Hoyt Ming, born on October 6, 1902 in Choctaw County, Mississippi. He was born into a musical family where more than half the kids played an instrument. One day, when Hoyt was just 15 years old, his father invited over a string band to play for a house party. And hearing them, Hoyt was instantly struck and inspired to take up the fiddle for himself. And starting with simple songs first, like Shortened Bread, he would go on to learn to play everything by ear. Well, all the Ming kids were quite talented, and they started playing for parties in the area. Now, during the 20s, Hoyt at this point had gotten married to another musician, Roselle, who played guitar, and they would continue to play together for parties and events, usually accompanied with Roselle's sister on mandolin. Now, one day, in early 1928, a certain talent scout from the Victor record label, yep folks, that Victor talent scout, Ralph Peer, who had also discovered the Carter family and Jimmy Rogers, well, he turned up in Tupelo and announced that he would hold an audition for musicians who wanted to make a record. Now on that day, Hoyt was checking out some brand new Victrolas at a local drugstore when he heard the news and decided to run over to Peer for an audition. Well, he went to grab his wife and sister-in-law for the audition, but turns out the latter wasn't available, so he grabbed his brother Troy to fill in on mandolin instead. And it was kind of a long shot, as no string band in Mississippi had ever made a recording before. But luckily, the audition went well, and to the astonishment of the local musicians that crowded the sidewalk around that drugstore that day, clutching their fiddles and guitars, well, Peer offered a contract on the spot to the Ming family band. And a few weeks later, the group comprised of Hoyt, Roselle, his brother Troy, and a square dance caller named Coggins made the trip to the Peabody Hotel in Memphis to cut an album. Now, the studio session got off to a rocky start. Well, first his brother Troy showed up to the studio that day with not just his mandolin, but also some beers. And the caller, Coggins, thought some beers was also a great idea. And by the time the recording was underway, well, the caller got a bit sloshed and started getting a bit sloppy. And during the recording of the song Old Red, well, Coggins totally missed his cue. So Hoyt shoved his elbow into the caller's ribcage. And Coggins just burst out, well, I'll let you listen to it for yourself. Yep, folks, this was actually left in the recording. Classic stuff. Now, when the band began warming up and going through a practice run on Indian War Whoop, Peer noticed Roselle beating time with her foot. And we're not just talking about some light toe taps here. You see, Roselle used to play the pump organ, and she developed a habit of moving her feet up and down in time to the music. And, well, that same motion carried over when she took up the guitar as well. And Peer remarked how much he really liked that stepping sound. but Rizal said she wasn't planning on actually stopping when they would start recording, as it would just get in the way of the actual music. Now, it was actually pretty common practice at the time to have musicians muffle or remove their shoes during a recording. But Pierre was not really a man to back down. I mean, just look at the guy. And he insisted Rizal stop and hold nothing back. And he even went as far as to place a microphone closer to her foot. So folks, that's how that beat made its way into the song. And while Hoyt and Rizal never really liked the sound of that foot stepping on the record, well, Pierre simply loved it, and he thought it was unique and would help to sell more albums. And he even decided to feature it by changing the band's name, which he did, to the Pep Steppers. Now, while I couldn't get permission for the Pep Steppers recording, there are a number of old-time and bluegrass bands that have gone on and basically copied this version. And as you're listening to it now, you can hear for yourself that the song is kind of unique. There are no actual lyrics, just these long, sort of monotone cries that may be a little too understated to actually be called all-out war whoops. But the vocals and the fiddling are so captivating against this repetitive rhythm that you're almost lulled into a kind of trance. And there's nothing super flashy here. There's just this strong push and pull between high and low registers. And Ming held that high note for as long as he could and just kept holding it, increasing the intensity until at the very last minute, it just kind of drops like an eagle off a cliff to the lower register before soaring back up again. And all the time, that steady driving beat and rhythm. As one reviewer noted, Ming may have titled this piece Indian War Whoop, but he created something otherworldly that defies labels. Well, the record was released, but there were a couple of typos that would have some lasting effects. First of all, for some reason or another, which we still don't know to this day, Hoyt's name was changed to Floyd. And the other thing that happened was that Pierre, deciding that one of the tunes that the band recorded on the album, entitled Florida Blues, wasn't going to work for a band from Mississippi. So Pierre, being Pierre, just changed the name to something more local sounding. And that's how the song Florida Blues got changed to Tupelo Blues on the album. Now, remember that point, because we'll come back to that one later. Well, the band got paid $25 per side, plus expenses, and soon returned back to Mississippi to see how the records played with the public. But, to everyone's disappointment, the album kind of sank like a rock. Even a novel marketing promotion by Pierre that sounds like early 20th century spam didn't work either. Ming recounts that one day, when his mother was just walking around downtown Tupelo, an airplane buzzed over the town, dropping leaflets onto the street below. She picked one up and was shocked to see a photo of the newly named Pep Steppers band, and on the backside an advertisement touting their hit songs, Old Red and Indian War Whoop. Well, while the records never made a splash, the band would go on to play at local fiddlers contests, county fairs, political rallies, and rural picnics. And of course, Indian War Whoop was the most requested piece at these gatherings, and the tune that Ming was most famous for. And when Ming would perform it, well, the story goes that he would first play the whooping note on his fiddle, and hold that note for a while. And then, mimicking the same pitch and tone of the fiddle, he would carry on the same note with his voice. While he held this note even longer, he would then place the fiddle on his lap, or even in its case, which caused quite a stir because it sounded as if the fiddle was still playing with no one actually touching it. I guess this gimmick was so convincing that Hoyt's son later recounts strangers stopping him on the street and asking him how his dad did that trick with his fiddle. Well, soon enough things began to change. Hoyt and Rizal began having children, and around this time a close musician friend got killed in a drunken brawl at a dance. And Hoyt decided, well, if the life of a musician was going to be like that, he didn't want any part of it. And so Hoyt Ming and his wife Rizal quit playing music and turned to farming sweet potatoes instead, putting out small ads in agricultural newspapers for sweet potato plants and selling them, either directly to other farmers or farming co-ops. And eventually, by the 40s and 50s, it appears as if the Ming's music career was just a thing of the past. That is, until something crazy happened. And we'll get back to old Hoyt and see what happened, but first let's discuss the origin of this song. There's actually not much I could find on the history of this tune, but I was kind of surprised to actually find it does turn up in George Knopf's 1839 publication of Virginia Reels. It's the oldest printed documentation we have of the tune, and since it was printed that long ago, it most likely would have been around for at least a generation or more before that. But what's really interesting about this finding is that while I figured the vocal whoop was just some sort of recently added gimmick, it looks like even that may be an original feature of the song, as the whoop is actually included in the music, under the description falsetto. As far as the name goes, the title actually seems to be fairly widespread up and down the Mississippi region, with tunes by that same name collected from the deep south to the Missouri Ozark region. So while Hoyt's version seems to be more in the Ozark style, there is another old version of Indian war whoop which is unrelated and predominantly found in the Mississippi and Louisiana area. You're listening to this other version of Indian war whoop now, as performed by the North Louisiana fiddler, Hitter Coven. Same name, different song, a bit happier feel. It's actually related to the tune Dusty Miller, if you can recognize some of that melody. Well, I said I would get back to the Ming family band before closing this story. But before we do, we have to introduce this man, Harry Smith. Smith was a man described by the poet Allen Ginsberg as, quote, a very unique character and a great genius as a hermetic philosopher, filmmaker, painter, archivist, magician, legendary person who knew Thelonious Monk and Charlie Parker, and came from the Northwest, and knew peyote and American Indians. Well, at a time when the country was starting to reject much of its cultural heritage, Smith loved to collect and produce old folk music for the wider public. His anthology of American folk music today is an icon and a landmark of national heritage, filled with music that Bob Dylan later described as weird, full of legend, myth, Bible, and ghosts, chaos, watermelons, clocks, everything. It influenced singers ranging from Joan Baez to Jerry Garcia. Now, one of its standout tracks was, of course, Indian War Whoop. And because it sounded like nothing else, and because absolutely nothing was known about this Floyd Ming, or the Pep Steppers, it turned Ming into an almost mythical figure, like the blues legend Robert Johnson. You see, almost 50 years had passed since the Mings recorded Indian War Whoop, and as the albums made its rounds throughout the country, over time rumors began to swirl about who this Floyd Ming really was. Some speculated that, well, with the last name of his, he was Chinese. Others insisted that he was an American Indian, and that the wild whooping on his record was actually a super authentic Cherokee war cry. And just to clear up any confusion about the name, it looks like the name Ming was changed from Meng, which is of German origin. Glad I could clear that one up. So while the true identity of Floyd Ming seemed lost over time, as there was actually no one by that name, well, Mr. Harry Smith was not one to give up. And being in the music industry and having successfully tracked down some old blues musicians before, he had learned some good tricks for tracking down lost musicians. So, remember how Ralph Peer renamed Florida blues into Tupelo blues? Thankfully, the mistake proved to be a big clue, and Smith figured if he could track down this Floyd Ming character, he might just find him in Tupelo, Mississippi. Now, by this time, Ming had long since moved from Tupelo. However, when Smith got there, he did meet some locals who knew there was a certain Hoyt Ming that could be found, and kindly directed him to the Ming potato farm. And it was just a couple of days before Mr. Smith arrived in Mississippi on that day in 1973 when Hoyt just happened to come across an old photograph. And it just so happened to be the photo taken exactly 45 years ago, the same one that Peer had dropped from the airplane over Tupelo, right after that first recording session in 1928. So it kind of came as a shocker when just a few days later, some stranger knocked on Hoyt's door. The stranger said he came down to Mississippi from New York and asked him if he was the Ming who had recorded Indian War Whoop in 1928. And according to Ming's son, who recounted this story, well, he said his dad was, quote, flabbergasted. Absolutely flabbergasted. Stunned by the coincidence and realizing that 1973 marked both the 15th anniversary of his retirement and the 45th year of the Victor session, and having just found that old photo, well, Hoyt agreed to a partnership with Freeman, and soon afterward, Hoyt and Roselle, with their son Hoyt Jr. and James Alford on guitars, were booked for the National Folk Festival, where they played to much acclaim. And they would go on to even cut a couple new albums and continue to play at events and festivals throughout the country. And it's curious to reflect that if Ralph Peer hadn't left researchers a clue in Tupelo Blues, none of this might have happened. Now, Roselle passed in 1983 and Hoyt passed in 85, literally doing what he loved best. He was at a music gathering in Kosciuszko. He had just finished a set where he played fiddle, and leaving the stage to sit down, he had a heart attack. And of course, as we know, the story doesn't end there. In 2000, John Hartford re-recorded Indian War Whoop for the soundtrack of the Coen brothers' film Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And it was only a matter of time that Hoyt's son, Hoyt Ming Jr., who was living in Tuscaloosa, soon found out about the movie and the song as well. Interested that his father's music was being heard by a new generation again, well, he decided to contact Peer's publishing company in Nashville to see what was going on. And it was a good thing that he called because, well, it turned out that his father, Hoyt Ming himself, had actually signed a royalty agreement with Peer on that day way back in 1928. And it turned out that the record company had been holding the royalty checks for years. And now it even included the proceeds for the music soundtrack as well. And all of these payments were eventually released to Hoyt's kids. I guess that name change to Floyd really messed things up for a time. So, I guess I'll just leave off on that happy note. And once again, folks, thanks for listening.